Hi everyone, Rob here and welcome back to Workshop 4B. In this workshop we're going to be covering muscle functions and their locations with some really good specific examples for you to understand. We've really tried to pick out the most important ones that we use in everyday life, and then we're going to talk about some different types of muscle terminology when it comes to exercise. So let's get into it. The first example we're going to go through is the gluteus maximus, the glute muscle, the butt muscle in your body. This primary function of this muscle is to extend the hip joint, and this is really important for delivering athletic power in the lower body. Think about running, sprinting, jumping, throwing, tackling. All the major movements you do from your lower body require you to push off forcefully from the ground. That's called extension of the hip, and that's why the glute is important. Okay, the glute is the prime mover. It's the muscle most responsible for extending that hip joint. The location of the gluteus maximus, it originates at the ilium and the sacrum, and it inserts at the femur, the big thigh bone in our body, and the ITB. The ITB is called the iliotibial band, and that runs along the outside of our quadricep. Some really good exercise examples for you to understand how this muscle works is the glute bridge, where you're laying on the floor and lifting your hips up. Another exercise is the hip thrust, and finally we can all understand the deadlift being an exercise that really helps to strengthen those glutes. The second example is the iliopsoas. Now the iliopsoas muscle is actually comprised of two, the iliacus and the psoas. You might have heard of your hip flexor muscles before. This is what these muscles are called. They're called the iliopsoas. So as I've explained, the primary function of this muscle is flexion of the hip, and this is commonly tight and dysfunctional, so that means it's just not working properly in desk-bound people. So people that spend a lot of time sitting on a desk or perhaps driving a car, their hips are in a closed-off position and their hip flexors get really tight. One of the problems with having tight hip flexors is it's going to lead to some lower back pain further down the track. The location, the muscle originates at the ilium and at the lumbar spine, and it inserts to the upper part of the thigh bone or the femur. Some really good exercise examples to train this muscle are going to be hanging leg raises, so hanging from a pull-up bar and lifting your knees up towards your chest, doing the same exercise on the floor like a lying leg raise, and also the stretch for it is the lunge stretch, so getting into a lunge position, stretching out those tight hip flexors. The next muscle is the rhomboids. Now the rhomboids are a really important postural muscle. Think about the muscles that squeeze your shoulder blades together. So very important for posture. Their primary function is retraction. So retraction is squeezing together, squeezing the shoulder blades together, and depression, so pulling down of the scapula, the shoulder blades. So it's very important for posture. It also helps you to work some of the bigger back muscles. So we might squeeze your shoulder blades together when we're performing back exercises in the gym. The location of this muscle, it originates in the middle of the spine in the T2 to T5 vertebrae, and it inserts onto the medial border of the scapula or the shoulder blade. And as I discussed, some really good exercise examples are any sort of rowing movements in the gym. So it could be the rowing machine is a good exercise for strengthening your rhomboids. Cable rows is a classic rhomboid strengthening exercise, making sure that you're really squeezing your shoulder blades together as you pull the weight back, as well as exercises such as scapular push-ups and scapular retractions or scapular squeezes, good exercises for rhomboids. The next one is the upper trapezius. So the upper trapezius, the reason why we've chosen to highlight this one, it's a very important muscle in terms of posture and injury prevention, and it's definitely a muscle group that gets tight in most every person. So its primary function is to elevate or to lift up the scapula. So think about a shrug. If you shrug your shoulders up, you're using the upper trapezius muscles. Like I said, they get really tight and overactive in most people. If you spend all day staring at your phone, or if you're driving a car, or if you're in front of a computer or at a desk, typically with your shoulders hunched up, you're going to be using these upper trap muscles and they're going to be getting too tight. That leads to poor posture, and then it's going to lead down the track to some back and neck pain as well. The location, so it originates at the occipital bone, which is just at the base of the skull, to the C7, the seventh vertebrae in the top part of your spine, and it inserts at a few different places, as you can see there on the slide. The acromion, which is the tip of the shoulder joint, the clavicle, which is also known as the collarbone, and the spine of the scapula or the shoulder blade. So some exercise examples. So if you wanted to train your upper trapezius, you could do things like shrugs with dumbbells or barbells. You could do a carry exercise like a farmer's walk, which is picking up a heavy weight and walking it up and down the length. And then if you wanted to stretch those upper trapezius, which I recommend for most people, is you would do a little side lateral neck stretch where you would just grab your neck and tilt it to the side. The next one is the pec major, pectoralis major, big chest muscles that everybody exercises in the gym. Its primary function is flexion and adduction of the humerus, which is the upper arm bone. So it's important for things like tackling and also upper body pushing movements. So a classic example like doing a bench press or a push-up or grabbing somebody in a hug or tackling is using those pec muscles. The problem with using a lot of pec muscles all the time is some people have them overdeveloped, which means they train them too much. They have their pec muscles that are tight and overdeveloped, and what that happens is it leads to the shoulders rotating and rolling in, and that leads to posture problems. The location of this muscle originates at the sternum. Okay, so we know where the sternum is, right in between our pec muscles, so right in the front of our rib cage, and the clavicle or the collarbone, and it attaches at what's called the bicipital groove of the humerus. So there's a little notch on the top of your upper arm, and that's where the pec muscle attaches to, so it's responsible for moving the arm. So some exercise examples could be a bench press or a push-up, dumbbell flies, using the parallel bars for, say, a bench dip, and also doing a wall stretch, so putting your arm up to 90 degrees and twisting away from the wall. The next one to cover are the quadriceps muscles or the thigh muscles. The primary function or the use of these quad muscles are extension of the knee joint. So think about running, jumping, squatting, but most classically kicking. So the motion of you kicking, say, a football or a soccer ball is using extension of the knee, and that's using those quadriceps as a major muscle group there. The location, it originates at the ilium, which is in the pelvis, and the femur, which is the thigh bone, and it just inserts at the tibial tuberosity, that is a little bump on the bottom, on the top of one of your lower leg bones, so it runs over the top of your kneecap. Exercise examples for the quadriceps include leg extensions in the gym, front squats, that's where you're squatting with a weight in front of you. It could be a bar or a kettlebell or a sandbag or even no weight, and then just doing a basic standing quad stretch where you stand up and stretch your thighs. That's going to work the quadriceps. The next one to highlight are the transverse abdominis. These are a really important muscle group because these provide a lot of stability and support to your spine. So that is their primary function, spinal and pelvic stabilization. So if you've got a nice tight braced core, which is a phrase you might have heard before, it allows you to put more power through your legs and through your arms. What it also does, it reduces the risk of lower back injury. Okay, so think of the transverse abdominis as kind of like a belt. So when you strengthen these transverse abdominis muscles, it wraps tight like a belt around your spine and it protects you from injury. Okay, you can see there the location where it originates. It's on the slides, the ilium, the rib cartilage, and the thoracolumbar fascia. And it inserts at a few different spots here. The xiphoid process, linea alba, which is the line on the middle of your rectus abdominis, your six-pack, and the pubic crest. Exercise examples, really good exercises to get this muscle group as strong as possible. Okay, strong core, preventing lower back pain. Things like a prone hold, which is classically known as a plank, a hollow rock exercise where you're bracing through the spine, and bird dogs are all excellent exercises to strengthen the transverse abdominis. Now we're going to cover some muscle function terminology. These are a few important terms to understand when it relates to an exercise, so that when we perform an exercise or we perform a movement, we know what muscle groups are doing what muscle groups are helping, etc. The first one is called the agonist. So the agonist is the muscle that is primarily responsible for the exercise being performed. That moves into number 2 as well, which is called the prime mover. So we typically use these two terms kind of interchangeably. So for example, if we were to do a bicep curl in the gym, the biceps muscle would be the agonist and it would also be the prime mover. It's the muscle that's working and it's the muscle that's primarily or mainly responsible for doing that exercise. The antagonist is the opposite or the opposing muscle group. So again, if we use the bicep curl as an example, if we're squeezing and flexing the bicep to lift the weight, the opposite muscle group, which is the triceps, that has to relax, because if that muscle group doesn't relax, then we can't lift the weight, we can't bend the arm. So the triceps would be what's called the antagonist muscle group. The synergists are muscle groups that assist in the movement. So they are working within the exercise, but they're not the main muscle responsible. So with an exercise like a bicep curl, you might use some of your muscles in your forearms and also a muscle that wraps around your bicep and forearm called the brachioradialis. They are going to assist. So they're called synergists. So they're assisting with the movement of the exercise. The last one is the fixator. So the fixator are a muscle or a muscle group that stabilizes a joint when an action is being performed. So again, if we look at the bicep curl, we can see that the shoulder muscles are the deltoids and they are being the fixators, they are stabilizing the arm whilst you lift the bicep curl.